Good morning, day 120. Yay! Oh, there's something about nice, even numbers, which is a good thing to say on a day when we're going to talk about measuring and accurate measurements. And depending on which translation you have, the very first line of Proverbs chapter 11 is, "The Lord detests false measures or inaccurate scales or dishonest scales, but he loves just balances or accurate weights." So we've got weights and measurements, which I'm going to get conceptual here or metaphorical because and I'm going to try to narrow it down. My mind, of course, was thinking of so many examples in our modern world today. Boy, if you're an Apple Watch or a smartwatch wearer, you're tracking everything. But if something was off in the calibration or the way that the watch worked, you could be, step tracking is popular, for example. But if it isn't accurately, monitoring that, or it's measuring it improperly, you might be thinking that you're getting your 10,000 steps in, but you might only be getting 8,000 in. And then that understanding or even misunderstanding could lead you to eat a few more calories. It affects things. And we have a beautiful sunrise this morning. I can imagine back in these Old Testament days, they didn't have all this technology. The technology they had as a scale could be manipulated. And a dishonest business person who's, let's say, selling some, meat or spices, he could, even with a subtle difference, it might look very similar to an ounce. I'm just making things up here. But if he shaved just a little bit off of that, the buyer might not know. It might be such a subtle difference that the buyer might be like, "Oh, great." But on the end of the business owner, even that micro adjustment over numerous transactions, that puts a lot of extra money in his pocket. The first example in our modern day that came to mind, besides just, the example of the smart technology that we have, is the bags of chips. I can remember bags of chips having a lot more in them than what they used to. Now the bags, as a consumer though, they didn't change the size of the bags. They just started putting a few less chips in. And when you calculate that cost savings to the business owners, it's not that big of a deal to the consumer. They're still happy. They still want the bag of chips. They're still getting the bag of chips. But the price or what they're getting, it's just less. And they're able to save, but they weren't totally upfront. Now they might have put it on their label because they had to with weights and measures. Maybe it went from 15 ounces of chips down to 14. Small difference, but for the chip manufacturer, that's huge because they can spread that out over millions of packages and over time and repeated. So even small adjustments on the manufacturer or the seller side can add up to huge cost savings. But it's such a seemingly small difference to the consumer that they're like, "Oh, they won't care." But it's a little bit deceptive because they don't change the size of the packaging accordingly, right? The size, the bag still looks the same. So it's a little bit deceptive. So that's how I the first example that popped into my mind. And God says, I don't like that so much. You should be honest. There should be full disclosure. And maybe even in the chip manufacturing world, maybe one company, maybe they all use the same size bags, and maybe one company does put more in. Oh, and in today's world, okay, if we take this a little bit further, we've got, different kinds of chips now, and people can capitalize on consumer demand. And right now, like things like plant-based and vegan and all of those things are much more popular. So the cost to the manufacturer to maybe make a carrot chip might not be all that much more expensive, but because the demand is higher, they're like, well, I'll just charge double for this, and maybe I'll even put less in. And so on the manufacturing side, if we're not wise or discerning or, careless consumers, and we just allow this to happen, that, it can be really deceptive when you're talking about weights and measures. This is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I'm actually getting ready to head to the airport here in just a couple of hours. And that's another really good example of you've got a captive audience, the same bag of chips that I can pay, let's say $1.50 for at the grocery, and I'm talking about the small single serving bags at the checkout line, they're going to want $3 for at the airport. Well, it's the same product. How does that happen? Well, you've got a captive audience. And maybe they can't leave the airport. If they're hungry, they're stuck there. So you get to charge them what you want. And then that probably goes on down the line too on rents. An airport might be charging double or triple to that store owner for the rent to have a spot with a captive audience than if they went to, let's say, have just a corner market in a part of the local city. So weights and measures are important. They're how we make decisions. And if what you're measuring against isn't accurate, and then you don't know it, boy, that can lead to a whole heap of troubles. Like back to the smart watches. And one of the things that I have really focused on and that has changed for me and changed my life dramatically is the amount and the quality of sleep that I'm getting. Well, if I just say now the number of hours that I'm spending in bed is the same. I went to bed fairly early a few years ago, would wake up at fairly the same time, but I was not sleeping the way that I'm sleeping now. So how we even measure things like that and then take into account even that spillover, just like the example of the rent. And one of the things that I was doing, I was kind of renting my sleep at a high rate, or I was paying for it, and with my misunderstanding of measurements. And drinking wine on a regular basis, or any alcohol, doesn't matter what it is. If you're drinking that on a regular basis, and most of us, I'm not alone, most of us that do that, we tend to do it in the evening right before we go to bed because it makes you sleepy. A lot of people use a nightcap as a sleep aid. Well, scientifically, you don't sleep when you after you drink. The way that the chemical of alcohol interacts with your body, it does cause a little bit of sleepiness, but another part of your brain wakes up. And also, depending on how much you drink, you might even just completely pass out, which is not sleeping. So you're in bed and you're maybe deceiving yourself, just like I was, that you're getting 8 hours of sleep, when really you might only be getting 4. because your brain and your body is not getting true sleep, the sleep that it needs with the full REM cycles. So if you're doing food, all kinds of lifestyle things can do this, can disrupt our sleep. But in order to really get an accurate picture, and you have to understand what sleep does for your body, what a full night of true sleep looks like and feels like, so you can have an accurate measure. And some of us have been doing things for so long and deceiving ourselves for so long that we have no idea what we're doing. And we just don't know. There's a lack of knowledge of what we're doing to ourselves, because we're measuring things wrong, and we're measuring and weighing things wrong. We're mistaking hours in bed for hours of sleep. And then we wake up and then we complain and we go, like, I don't know why I'm so tired. I was in bed. I got 8 hours of sleep. No, you didn't. You might have gotten 4 or 5. And do that on a regular basis. And the amazing thing of the human body is that it will learn how to adapt no matter what we do to it. Like, it is built for survival. It will, re-regulate chemicals and do things to survive. And then you even get used to what that feels like. And you have no measure and no concept of, or memory of what it even feels like to feel good, to feel rested. I do now. And yesterday I did not feel rested, and I struggled all day. That's very rare for me. But I know the reasons now. I have clarity around that because I'm measuring accurately. I know what my scales are telling me. I know how to read them as a consumer, and I have a proper, accurate measure. There's no deception going on from myself or from my understanding of how sleep works. So, and in the Bible, in this particular Proverbs, I think he's really going after the heart of the salesperson or the person who has the weighing. But when we look at our lives and when we think metaphorically, we play both roles. We're our salesman and we're our consumer. And a lot of us walk around deceiving ourselves. And either out of ignorance, complacency, people pleasing, like trying to live according to maybe your partner's schedule when we're talking about sleep, or other people's schedule, or maybe even the workplace, our own behavior. Like, it's not easy because the world out there tells us to, maybe it doesn't tell us, but it encourages the nightly nightcap along with watching whatever's popular on Netflix right now, and maybe having a little snack, and then depriving ourselves. And then at the same time, it's saying, well, get up at 5 a.m. and go to boot camp and do all the things. We're measuring according to like behavior and outside looks. And on the inside, a lot of us are rotting. We're running a rat race that's exhausting us, but trying to look good on the outside, keeping it all together. And maybe we've even got the waistline and the muscles to prove it. But at home, it's a shit show. Excuse my French. And you've got broken relationships and, things happening. And so are you measuring properly, what success and what a good life, the world's weights and measures? Or are you really trying to be an educated consumer of the Creator and how He designed and created things, and then living according to that? That has not changed. That is consistent. It's principles. It's timeless. And depending on what decade you live in, you can pull out our local papers and magazines and see what the current trend was. Like that's how we operate, according to the latest trend. which is not always accurate. It's a lot of marketing and hype packaged and designed to look like something that it's really not. So anyway, that's my little reflection of the day from Proverbs chapter 11 verse 1. And I'll leave you with a sunrise. Have a great, great day. Go rise and shine.